Managing Director of Generation, Rulani Matubula, are currently out on their second day of power plant visits, and they will be able to give you a boots on the ground update on what they have observed there. Jan?
Thank you, Andre. Good morning to all connected today. As the GCS correctly just stated, Rulani and myself is now for the second day visiting power stations. Yesterday we went to Arnott, to Duva, to Matla and Letaba. This morning we've been to Camden, and currently, as I'm speaking to you and Rulani as well, we're at Majuba Power Station. So the intention is to visit Monday and Tuesday the remainder of the power stations, and the main purpose is to thank those colleagues of ours that have stepped up to the higher call of duty, to really thank them as well as their families. Now, over the last 3 days, we have returned units at Camden, at Tutuka, Kusile, Kendall, as well as Majuba. However, some of these tripped and were returned on the same day, and others were returned then from previous failures. Now, in some cases, other units that have tripped have not been able to return due to various reasons. One being the unavailability of operators at some of these power stations. Now, unfortunately, a unit at Medupi Power Station, 705 megawatts, tripped this morning. Fortunately, we had sufficient capacity not to implement a higher stage of load shedding. But the sad part is, over the last 3 days, with units returning and units on breakdown, the net gain in capacity has only been 306 megawatts, or for that matter, 2 open cycle gas turbines. Now, overnight, with stage 4 load shedding implemented, we managed to pump water into the upper reservoirs at the pump storage power stations. And this has improved the situation and allowed us, as the GCS said, at stage 4 this morning, and avoided stage 6. We also then managed to deliver some diesel to our open cycle gas turbine power stations overnight, and we gained a bit of reserve at these stations. Although the dam levels and the diesel levels have improved, it is important to note that these are still at very low levels, and we will need at least the time over the weekend to fully replenish them. Now, this morning, just as an example, with stage 4 implemented load shedding, we still had to use 7 open cycle gas turbines to support the system. Now, the diesel and dam levels are being carefully monitored to balance the need for either stage of load shedding, so as not to deplete these reserves completely. So it is something that we are really giving a lot of attention to. We have managed to obtain additional diesel volume in Cape Town for the Ankerlig power station. However, this needs to be moved to the power station by road tankers, and logistically it will take time to deliver to the power station. Now, later this evening, we are expecting to return the unit that tripped this morning at Medupi, as well as an additional unit at Duva Power Station. Now, this will definitely relieve the pressure on the system, but due to the late return to service, will unfortunately be insufficient to stave off the stage 6 load shedding for tonight. Now, the return to service of other units has been delayed due to the lack of operating staff available at the power stations to return these units. Now, these operators are highly skilled, and returning these units without these operators runs the risk of damaging, these generators that need to return. I'd like to emphasize also what the Group Chief Exec just said, and like to point out that the effect of the illegal actions is at more than 2,500 megawatts, or for that matter, 3 stages of load shedding. of generation capacity is unavailable to be returned to service due to the lack of operators. Then we also do not have time currently to attend to some of the damage that has occurred during this period. Over and above the more than 2,500 megawatts of current capacity that is not available, there's a further 2,600 megawatts of generation capacity at risk due to the prolonged unlawful behavior. Now, a detailed assessment will be required to determine the extent of the damage that we have incurred, as well as the time needed, to rectify the situation. And this will be a challenge in itself, given, the constrained system that we are operating. I think it's also important to note that during this time, the system may be more unreliable and unpredictable due to the way we had to operate the system. Now, I've seen in the media some speculation about blackouts, and I thought, let me just deal a little bit with, these concerns that we are experiencing, from various sources. Now, every minute of every day, the system operator balances the supply and demand to ensure that power system is balanced and that it's stable. So to ensure the reliability and to ensure the integrity of the system at all times. Now, under normal conditions, generation is dispatched to meet the demand for electricity as and when our customers require it. Now, when there is insufficient generation capacity available, as it's currently the case, the system operator is compelled to reduce the demand on the power system to match the available generation capacity. Now, by load shedding preemptively, we are ensuring that the power system remains in balance and that the 50 hertz or the heartbeat of the system remains stable and predictable. Now, from a customer perspective, it may appear that the power system is in danger of collapsing or blackout. But because the supply and demand is balanced and maintained and sufficient reserves are held back, the system remains stable and at no higher risk than normal. Now, unfortunately, operations have not recovered sufficiently at our power stations, hampering efforts to return generators to service. And this will necessitate the implementation of stage 6 load shedding again today from 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And thereafter, stage 4 will be implemented over the weekend from 7 o'clock until midnight, with stage 2 being implemented from midnight up until 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, it is unfortunate that intimidation and unlawful action and acts continue. Now, Eskom appeals to its labour partners and striking employees to embrace the higher purpose of putting the people of South Africa first, respect the law, and to desist from illegal and undemocratic conduct. Let us clearly understand the current challenges related to unemployment in the country and the negative contribution this has on the economy and the lives of 60 million people of the country. We would then like to remind the public during this time that load shedding is implemented only as a last resort to protect the integrity of the electrical system and the national grid. We therefore urge all South Africans to continue using electricity sparingly, especially during these uncertain times on the power system. Now, our loyal middle management, as the Group Chief Exec has spoken about earlier, have worked tirelessly to keep the operations flowing. Colleagues, we thank you and we salute you for that. Now, Eskom would like to also take this opportunity to thank our Munich partners and control center staff who tirelessly as well implement the load shedding according to schedule. The well-controlled rotation of stage 6 blocks is a testament to the care taken by all involved. I believe that's all I wanted to share with the public. Rulani, I'd like you now to please take over and please to take us through some of the detail that you believe is important that you'd like to share with the country. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone connected. Jan, I trust that yourself and Andre have covered the majority of the data in terms of the state of our units and state of the system. And what I would like to do is to echo your sentiments on our employees at different power plants that have since resumed their work, and also appreciate our managerial teams who have left their laptops in their offices, took their overalls and went into the plant to make sure that we keep putting megawatts on the grid and ensure that South Africa does not end up being put into complete darkness. We appreciate the sacrifice and commitments, and we continue as the generation team to work hard around the clock to make sure that the units that are currently off, we bring them back to the grid. There is unfortunately a backlog of maintenance that we need to deal with at the moment. We had 3,000 megawatts of units that are off for planned maintenance that are currently being delayed due to this strike since the last week, which delays the anticipated return of these units into the grid. However, we'll find ways and means to mitigate that, to ensure that we can ensure the successful return of the units. We are currently doing the repairs at Medupi 1 that we lost this morning to ensure that it's back online before the evening peak this evening. We're also preparing a unit at Duva Power Station, which had been highly impacted by the strike and delayed. And we believe that it will also be online in the next hours. So, Jan, I would like to really appreciate our men and women that have continually ensured that we put megawatts on the grid during this difficult time. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Rulani, Jan, and Andre. Now I shall take your questions. Colleagues, Andre de Ruyter opened with a confirmation that the wage talks are currently underway at the Central Bargaining Forum, and that is where all discussions about the wages will be had. Eskom will communicate when there is something to communicate with, when there's something else to say. At this point, the confirmation is the talks are currently underway. So I will not go into the questions about what does Eskom expect or when it wants to finalize the discussions. I'll take the question from William Horn of Netwerk 24. Can we please get an update on diesel? How much diesel is Eskom currently consuming at stage 6? Who are Eskom's suppliers? If many, please list some of them. What are the diesel stock levels at Houriqua and Ankelech? Do suppliers still have enough diesel? Jan, please, will you answer those questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Sigunati. William, how much diesel are we using during stage 6 load shedding? It depends. It depends on the time of the day and it depends on the demand at that point. But what you can, like I said to you this morning, during stage 4, we used 7 open cycle gas turbines. Now, it can go up to about sometimes 16, 17, 18 of these units. But typically when we implement stage 6, that is then to limit the usage of our emergency reserves, that is water as well as diesel. Let's use on average, just to give you an average, I would guess about 8 open cycle gas turbines. Now, each of these units are consuming 14 liters of diesel a second. So you can do the calculations yourself. So it is a significant amount of diesel that we are using. So I'm going to repeat it again. So if we use one open cycle gas turbine, you can use 14 liters of diesel per second. So what you can do, you can time it by 60 by 60, and then the number of hours, and then you will see how many liters of diesel that we have used. Now, who are the suppliers? I will provide that information to yourselves, after having consulted, but we do use a state-owned company, Petro SA, extensively for Houriqua in Mossel Bay, but then we do have some other suppliers and some ad hoc suppliers that we are using as well. Now, what are the diesel stock levels at Houriqua? We just in the mid-70s, about 70, 76 when I checked a while ago, 76%. And at Ankerlig, because we had the opportunity, because of stage 6 and stage 4 load shedding, that we upped that diesel level from where it was alarmingly just about 30% to just about above 40%. So that's where we're standing now. Do suppliers still have enough diesel? I believe that we have some challenges with some availability of diesel volumes. However, and I can really comment the suppliers as well as the ad hoc suppliers for coming, and coming to the party and understanding, where we find as a country ourselves and making volumes available. Now, we have a ship that will be docking over the weekend, and then I believe that we will be in a much better position. Thanks, Sigurati.
Thank you, Jan. Andre, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks, Jan and Sigurati. The total spend for the month of June was 1.54 billion against a budget of 700 million. So we spent double the allocated amount, and that continues a trend that we've seen for the year, where we have spent so far in our financial year to date 4.14 billion versus a budget of 1.99 billion. Some of it obviously due to higher diesel prices as a result of very high crude oil prices, but we have also been consuming substantially more diesel in order to avoid load shedding. So I just wanted to add those figures. Thanks.
Thank you, Andre. The question from Akwana Machoba of MoneyWeb is slightly different from the labor talks. What recourse is Eskom planning against workers who are striking illegally? Andre, the writer?
Yeah, again, we don't want to preempt any agreement reached at the wage negotiations being held today. But we will be taking disciplinary action against workers that have stayed away unlawfully. That may include the application of a principle of no work, no pay. Where there are acts of intimidation and violence, the Eskom disciplinary code will apply, and we will be processing the various investigations accordingly. And of course, where there are criminal acts, these will be reported to the South African Police Services for them to investigate, and if sufficient evidence is found, hand over cases to the NPA for prosecution. Thanks.
Thanks, Andre. Terence Kramer from Engineering News has some questions. Were any immediate supply or demand side options to alleviate load shedding proposed during the recent roundtable that Eskom has hosted with energy experts? Have the next parcels of Eskom grid-ready land for renewables been identified? When will the bidding process begin? NERSA has published its RFD for the 2022-23 multi-year price determination. Has Eskom decided on its response? Are you able to take these, please, Andre?
Sure, Sekunati. Terence, yes, the answer is that we did consider supply and demand side options to alleviate load shedding. These options are under consideration and under investigation. Again, some of them require policy interventions, so we have been engaging with our shareholder, and we will leave that to the policy side to decide on, but we have certainly provided our input into opportunities for us to bring a rapid conclusion to load shedding through interventions on both the supply and the demand side. In answer to your second question, have the next parcels of Eskom land been identified? Yes, they have. We intend to approach the market by August, and that is when we will commence with the process. I may also add that we are doing an extensive survey of all of our land as well as grid connections, mapping this on our geographical information system, GIS, with wind and solar data as well as land ownership, with a view to identifying which areas can offer immediate grid access. And our intention is to, as soon as we have a web accessible site, make this information available to potential developers and the general public for that matter on a real-time basis, so that the information is at the disposal of anybody who would like to connect to the grid. We have taken note of the NERSA documents, and this is something that we are considering. Our distribution team as well as our regulatory team are going through this in detail, and once we have collated all of our comments, we will provide our response to NERSA. Thank you, Sekunati.
Andre, thank you. I'm not sure if Sekhumoto is on the line at this point, but Isabel would be on the line. This question from Linda Givitash of AFP is for transmission. What is the effect on the load shedding on the grid infrastructure? What is the risk of increasing the level to stage 8? What could prompt the decision to raise the level of load shedding? Do you want to take those, Andre? Or, we have Linda coming on there as well.
All right. Isabel, do you want to take it, or I can take it? Isabel, please.
Thanks, Andre. Good morning, everyone. So the risk of level 8 is very, very, very low, but it depends on what happens on the system, so we cannot exclude any up in load shedding levels at this stage. We are not preempting anything beyond stage 6 at this point in time. It depends on what happens on the network as we move along. So that is the short answer. Let me just see what the rest of the question was, Linda. Oh, you wanted to know about the effect on the grid. On the transmission grid, we have not seen any adverse effects to date, except for, of course, the Gorabasa incident, which has been discussed. And the reasoning is that most of the switching is actually taking place at the distribution as well as a municipal level. So we cannot answer for the municipal areas, and on the distribution areas, what does happen is that we do load reduction if necessary. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you, Isabel. That's Isabel Fick. She is a general manager in the System Operators Office. Thank you for that response. We have next Janine Erasmus from Business Day. Does the 13,600 megawatt load losses include or exclude the 2,700 megawatt non-online as a direct result of the strikes? Roughly how many workers are not back at work yet? Will wages be docked for those who are unable to get to work due to intimidation? Andre, you answered that last question about disciplinary processes, which may or may not include docking wages. Can you answer the first two, please, or shall we leave Jan that?
I will answer the first one. Rulani can tackle the next one. Does the 13,600 clauses include the 2.7? Yes, it does. Rulani?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Three of our power stations are the ones that are currently mainly affected, and 90% of our non-beginning employees at those three power stations have not reported for work, and due to also intimidation, even some of our contracted workers of our service providers are also finding it difficult to come to work, and that is what is affecting even some of the maintenance work that we supposed to do on the units that are off for planned maintenance. Thanks, Jan.
Rulani, please stay right on there. Please clarify, one, what are these three power stations? And you say 90% of bargaining workers at those power stations, not across Eskom, am I correct?
Yes, not across Eskom. It's mainly on those, as I'm seated here, it's only on those three power stations, which is Matla, and Rina, and Arnold power station.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Anton Meyer of Pretoria FM. Were you able to determine whether any damage were caused to power station infrastructure during the illegal strike? What is the load shedding outlook for the weekend? The last question, Anton, has been answered. Any damage due to the illegal strike? Jan, Rulani?
Rulani, please.
Yeah. What we are aware of, Sekonati, is that there is currently maintenance that is not happening at most of our plants, and that by itself results in defects that are not being addressed, and that constitute major failures on our plant. So there are plants that are critically affected on the stations that I'm referring to, and that will take us some time for us to be able to fix those.
Thank you, Rulani. Dunin Erasmus, your questions on diesel have just been answered by both Jan and by Andre. I shall move on to Terence Kramer. In your analysis, what is motivating the ongoing wildcat actions, given that unions have made a clear return to work calls? In other words, is the motive, in your view, only confined to the wage dispute? Second question, during your visits to the various power stations, have you seen any evidence of sabotage? This third question to Mr. Durator. Any response to renewed calls for your resignation? Andre, you can take all of these questions, please.
Right, thanks, Terence. On the first question, I don't want to speculate on motivation for wildcat strikes, where workers at certain power stations are defying the instructions or requests from union leadership. I think those questions are best addressed to union leadership itself, and in fact then they can explain the actions of their members and why we have seen the behavior that we have seen. So I would suggest that you direct that at them. I will hand the second question to Rulani. I think he's best placed to answer that one. And on the third one, my answer is no. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Yeah, during our visit to the power station, we have not observed any evidence of sabotage, except that some of our employees they had their own personal properties, such as vehicles, that were damaged for those employees who had reported for duty.
Thank you, Rulani and Andre. Helen Pillay is from IOL. Are the wage negotiations expected to conclude today? What is the likelihood of increasing the load staging? These two questions, Kaylin, have already been answered. We shall move on to the next one from Ryan Brothwell of Business Tech. What is the current load shedding forecast for the weekend? Answered. Vali Padiache, the workers, e.g. operators that have not returned to their workstations to date, do they include essential workers that should not have gone on strike in the first place in terms of the essential workers agreement with organized labor? Is Eskom aware of the number of such essential workers that are currently not at work? Is this a risk to continued operations? Vali, I believe again your questions have been answered by this team. Do any of you gentlemen want to take a bite at that? Or shall we move on?
Mr. Konate, I think we have answered Vali's questions, but in terms of do they include essential workers? Most definitely they do include. Do we know the numbers? Yes, we do. So a risk to further operations should they not return? Absolutely yes. Thanks.
You want to top that up, Andre?
Yeah, again, just to emphasize the point that Jan made is that Eskom is an essential service. Therefore, workers may not go on strike. In addition to the fact that they are essential workers and therefore may not strike, we obtain an interdict. So there is a double breach of the law here. And again, this is an unacceptable situation where the country is held hostage by wildcat actions taken without any apparent coordination or leadership on a national basis, but intends to drive double-digit wage increases, which are clearly not affordable. So these are very regrettable actions, and again, just to stress, unlawful. And of course, the accompanying acts of intimidation and violence are deplorable and very saddening to see that we find ourselves in this space as a country that these acts don't provoke more outrage. Thank you.
Andre, please don't go. You please answer this further question from Vali Padiachi again. What is Eskom's plan B if all the workers that are still on strike do not return to work by a critical cutoff date? Let's add to that. Do we have such a cutoff date? And you will take the next one from Anton Meyer again from Pretoria FM. Did you meet with President Ramaphosa regarding the current situation? And are there any further meetings planned? Are you at liberty to share what you discussed with the President?
As Jan and Rulani indicated, we are currently very grateful for the services rendered by our managerial, professional and specialist staff in really going above and beyond the call of duty to keep our plants operating. Ultimately, this is not a sustainable operation. Running a power station is a 24/7 operation that requires shifts to change. It requires ongoing maintenance work. It requires specialist skill that cannot be replaced on a short-term basis. The operators are skilled. They acquire their skills over many years, and we cannot simply replace them on a short-term basis. And that is exactly why the legislature has decided to declare Eskom power station operations an essential service and prohibited workers from striking. And in according with the law, we would therefore be in a position where if workers do not heed the call from their leadership as well as from Eskom management to return to work, then the country will be further exposed. And again, I would suggest that journalists on this call perhaps address those questions to some of the union leaders at power plants to hear what their logic and rationale is for the action that they are embarking on. Responding to Anton Meyer, I was involved in a meeting, 2 meetings as a matter of fact, with the President in the company of Minister Pravin Gordhan. We fully briefed the President on the situation. He is seized with the matter. We discussed a number of potential options. I'm not at liberty to disclose the nature or the content of these discussions. I will leave that to the President and the Minister to announce, and that may or may not take place in due course. So apart from confirming that I have personally briefed the President, I cannot give you any further information on the nature of those discussions.
Thank you, Andre. The next set of questions come from Jan Dilange. Jan is with a report of Media 24. As far as I'm aware, unions have for years tried to conclude a minimum service level agreement with Eskom in terms of the essential sections of the Labour Relations Act. Eskom didn't respond to these requests. Why is a minimum service level agreement not in place at Eskom? Andre?
Jan, I must admit, I'm not aware of the information that you are citing. Perhaps if you're good enough to share that with us, we can respond to it. But I'm not aware of this attempt by the unions to try and conclude a minimum service level agreement. But if you have access to that information, please send that to us and we will respond to you.
Thanks, Andre. Jan, the human resources team that could readily answer your question is currently at the Central Bargaining Forum at the wage talks. We will endeavor to get you a response, particularly if we receive an email from you that effect. The next question comes from Lizel Wilson from the SABC. 3 questions I have. What's the status of Kusile? That's the power station. Who exactly are the ad hoc suppliers? I presume that refers to the diesel that you referred to earlier, Jan. Who are the coal suppliers? Who are the contractors at Medupi, and can they be made public? Usually your questions are very broad and have really all been answered for a very long time. But Jan, do you have the names of the diesel suppliers, and can you just give one update on the status of Kusile?
Yes, I can. At Kusile, we have Kusile is a 6-pack power station, so 6 units of 800 megawatts. Now we successfully put into commercial operation units 1 to 4, so 4 units are in commercial operation. The work has progressed extremely well on the last 2 units, 5 as well as 6. I believe that we are very close to 85% of the construction component has been completed. Now we expect to synchronize, and there's a difference between synchronize and put into commercial operation. So, but we aim to synchronize unit number 5 for the first time to the grid in March next year. And then it will take some time for capability, and other commissioning tests that will take place before we put it in commercial operation. And then the aim is to put the last unit to have it first synchronized before the end of 2023. Now the question in terms of ad hoc suppliers, now those are Astron, it is Shell, BP, as well as Engine. In terms of the question on contractors at Medupi, as we all know, has been put into commercial operation, the whole power station. We had a setback, scored an own goal at, I think it was the 8th of August last year, when we had an explosion in unit number 4. But virtually all the work has been completed at Medupi, so we're finishing off some of the contracts and closing out some of the contracts. but for all intents and purposes, the work is complete at Medupi. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. We have now closed the chat, but I have just additional questions from Toli Mgambi of Newsroom Africa, who seems to have a very interesting relationship with technology. The power struggle between organized labor and management at Eskom has partly been blamed on you for failing to proactively circumvent it. And he says this question is for Andre de Ruyter. Two questions. Do you believe that this wage dispute is disguised to achieve the worst outcome, which is stage 8? If we do reach that stage 8 of load shedding, how do you hope to keep your job? Andre de Ruyter, do you believe this is disguised to achieve the worst outcome, and how do you plan to keep your job if we reach stage 8?
Toli, let me just understand your logic there. So workers embark on an illegal strike, they withhold their labor unlawfully, they engage in acts of intimidation and violence, and they do not respond to calls from the national leadership with whom Eskom management has a relationship. I think it's a bit harsh to hang that around the necks of Eskom management. I think we need to look at the law of the land. We need to look at whether or not we are a country that is governed by the rule of law, whether people respect the rule of law, whether they respect the bargaining fora that have been established in terms of long-standing recognition agreements that we have with organized labor, whether they respect the dispute resolution mechanisms established by the Labour Relations Act, such as the CCMA and other fora, the Labour Court, for example, before embarking on unlawful, illegal, wildcat strikes to try and extract double-digit wage increases at a time when our economy is under severe pressure. That, to my mind, I think is a question, again, that you should best address to those workers who have seen fit to engage in this action. Thank you, Sekonati.
Last question, Andre, then you can also give us your closing remarks. It comes from Sabelo Skiti of the Sunday Times. Outside of the labor issues this week, can Eskom tell us how many of their coal stations are adequately staffed with requisite technical skills? And how does this affect the preemptive maintenance done on these stations? That's the last one. And as I have said, colleagues, we will distribute this recording as soon as we've been able to download it. Andre?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer the question by passing it on to Jan and Rulani. They can give you an overview of the level of technical skill in our power stations and make sure that we can give you a feel for what we're doing to address the skills gaps that we do have. Jan, Rulani?
Thanks, Andre. I will come in and then Rulani can also please just build on what I'm saying. We do have sufficient warm bodies. However, a warm body with a qualification doesn't mean that when you are appointed in a certain position, that you're actually competent to execute the activities as required for that specific activity, as that specific position. So, and with this, I'm not saying that the individuals, our colleagues appointed, do not have the potential. I'm not saying that at all. However, in order to be skilled and competent means that you need to be trained, exposed, and developed. It also means that you have to have a coach and a mentor. However, that is something that is not in place 100%, and that is something that is taking a lot of focus and receiving a lot of attention. What we have also realized is that some of the pipelining, usually when your hair is getting as grey as mine and time passes on, that you need succession in place. You also then need pipelining in place. Now, these are also some of the things that, for whatever reason, we haven't given enough attention. So that is something that is taking the necessary focus as well. So in a nutshell, we have we have colleagues with a lot of potential and an ability in time to execute what is required from them. However, we need to train, develop skill, coach and mentor those colleagues in order to be able to sustainably provide, that service that is required. So there's a lot of focus on training and development, and we also understand that the human capital, our people, is the most important asset, to our organization. And this is what we must make sure that we focus on and get those colleagues, to the level that is required to ensure sustainable performance of the generation business. Thank you. Rulani?
Jan, it's well covered. Thank you.
Right, we're coming out of that briefing by Eskom saying the net gain in capacity for return power units has only been 306 megawatts, and saying that overnight they've managed to pump water and improving the situation. Also saying that they're using a significant amount of diesel to hold up stage 6 in the past few days. Let's see there, they were saying that 1.54 billion has been spent on diesel in June, and then that they're consuming 14 liters of diesel per second. And these are some of the stats to come out of that briefing. Of course, Konati Manjaja saying that because the bargaining process is currently underway, they are unable to comment on what's coming out of there. That will come out of later bulletins here on SABC News. Let's